planner Tim Stearns holds a weekly discussion of the financial challenges to secure retirement. Listen Saturday at noon for Protect and Grow with Tim Stearns.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. If you want a preview of what will be dominating your web browsing as well as your television sets over the next 100 days, all you have to do is go to Pennsylvania and McCormick's ad against Bob Casey in that Senate race there. McCormick taking another shot after losing to Oz in the primary 2 years ago, remember? And then Oz losing to Fetterman. Anyway, re-upping against Bob Casey in a state that Trump is leading right now, both against Biden and Kamala. And this ad that ties Casey to Kamala. You're going to be seeing this in Senate races, and, you know, versions of this will be right-fitted for use against other candidates at the congressional level. And obviously, Trump is going to be reciting these lines as he did to some extent in Charlotte, North Carolina, against Kamala himself.
Kamala Harris is inspiring and very capable. The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
Nonpartisan GovTrack has rated you as the most liberal senator.
I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Would you ban offshore drilling?
Yes.
What is the solution for voters in the fossil fuel industry?
Giving the workers an ability to transition. We're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct.
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation.
Abolish ICE.
Yeah.
Is that
Civil.
a position you agree with?
And we need to probably think about starting from scratch.
Outdated, it is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only way you're going to get communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street.
Would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What people
Yes. Yes.
to reduce red meat specifically.
Yes.
People who are convicted in prison, like the Boston Marathon bombers, on death row, people who are convicted of sexual assault, they should be able to vote?
I think we should have that conversation. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
So for people out there who like their insurance, well, they don't get to keep it.
Let's eliminate all of that. Let's move on. I am opposed to any policy that would deny any human being public health, period.
The more people get to know her, they're going to be particularly impressed by her ability.
That was Bob Casey singing the praise of Kamala against the backdrop of her record. The only thing that may be more damaging to Kamala's chances than her partnership with Biden for the last 4 years is her 2020 run for president, where she said all of those things. Not to mention her record as a senator, where she was rated by GovTrack, as you heard, the most leftist senator in the U.S. Senate, even left of Bernie Sanders. So defund police, defund ICE. Crossing the border illegally is just a civil offense, not a criminal one.
Murderers vote.
We got Boston bomber. We should have a conversation about him voting. I mean, all of these things. Speaking of Pennsylvania, ban on fracking. That's not going to go over so well. Even Fetterman had the wits to change his position on that in the general 2 years ago, you remember. So it's very interesting that Chris LaCivita, who's Trump's campaign manager, tweeted out yesterday that word is that it's going to be Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as her running mate. That would be interesting. For more on this and other matters, including the topic we were just discussing, which is the failed Trump assassination attempt and what we know, if anything more, after Christopher Wray's testimony yesterday, which is not really that much more. John Solomon joins us, award-winning investigative journalist, founder of Just the News, justthenews.com. John, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be joining you.
So what about, I guess let's tackle the running mate situation first, since she's on the clock for that. And you heard what I said about LaCivita tweeting out that word is that it's going to be Josh Shapiro. That makes sense, but Josh Shapiro is going to have a big job ahead of him trying to resuscitate Kamala in his home state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and And also, Josh Shapiro's positions are quite a bit more moderate than those of Kamala Harris. He's going to have to constantly explain why someone with his views would run with someone that, on that laundry list of things you just properly laid out, is Kamala Harris's long-term position. She's to the left of Biden. She's to the left of Bernie Sanders, according to the ratings. And she's also the person that's really the ignition point for the inflation that we've all suffered through the last 3.5 years. Why do I say that? The first of her 33 tie-breaking votes in the Senate was to approve the Biden stimulus plan, the very Biden stimulus plan that Larry Summers, the former Obama and Clinton's Treasury Secretary, warned would create inflation, and it did. And Kamala Harris got that passed by going to the Senate as the vice president in casting the tie-breaking vote. She's going to own inflation. She's going to own immigration. She's going to be owning not only the Biden record, but all of the things that she said she stood for back in 2020 when she was running to the left of Biden trying to win the presidential nomination. Going to be very difficult for a Shapiro or maybe a Gretchen Whitmer, another person probably on the short list, to have to defend that record because it's beyond where their voters are in their home states.
Well, and even going back to her time as Attorney General and when she was running in 2020, and she's participating in the fund that was bailing out Black Lives Matter protesters who had committed acts of violence in big cities in the summer of 2020. From that role, since we're being treated to, she's a prosecutor and she's going to prosecute the case against Trump because she's a prosecutor. She's got a keen legal mind and all that business. But if she has the record of a Kim Foxx, and Kim Foxx could get elected in Cook County, but not too many other places.
Yeah, listen, we just did a really important story, and you take a look at the last time she actually ran something herself, and that was when she was a district attorney in San Francisco and then the attorney general for California, the top law enforcement officials in those two communities. In both instances, Kamala Harris's office was routinely dogged by scandal. In the California Attorney General's office, there was a big sexual harassment scandal involving her deputy. Got to be very expensive to the taxpayers, had to pay a big settlement. And judges and media and defense lawyers all called out her office for failing to deal with misconduct, something very serious for a prosecutor. Your job is to uphold the law. In California and in San Francisco, very significant prosecutorial or government misconduct that occurred, and the judges were calling her and her office out for failing to deal with it properly. That is a sign, that is a record of leadership that I think a lot of people will become concerned about once they learn about it. We had some important reporting on it going through the court files earlier this week. She doesn't have a record of success. She has a lot of scandal, a lot of far-left rhetoric, and it's going to be tough for her to own that in a 4-month period. It's going to be much easier to define her as in negative circumstances than it's going to be able herself to improve her image. And one of the things that dogs are also, like Joe Biden, she's not a very good public speaker. She's very halting. She has awkward giggles. She sometimes trails off or repeats words or phrases over and over again, losing her train of thought. So, a smooth-talking politician might be able to smooth some of these things over, but she's not particularly strong in her rhetorical capabilities.
Didn't crime increase, though, when she was a prosecutor and the DA in California?
There was the beginning of what's been the long trend of crime surges in California, but just the inability to manage things like a lab technician apparently stole some evidence from a locker. It's required under the law. Even a first-year law student knows this, that you have to disclose that to the defense on all the cases where that lab technician did that. Her office didn't. They tried to fight doing it and ultimately got criticized strongly by federal judges and other judges in that district. Those sort of things, the basics of a job, she hasn't even been able to fulfill that. We know what she did on the border, or what she didn't do on the border, I guess we should say, the lack of action there. I think that image is going to be easy to set for the American public, and it's going to be hard for her to combat it because she's just simply not a great fast thinker on her feet or a good speech giver.
So justthenews.com, your site, was reporting about problems at Secret Service long before the failure in Butler, Pennsylvania. And one wonders outside of Cheadle resigning, are we going to see real reform of the Secret Service, whatever reforms are called for? Are we going to see a real accounting of the Secret Service's failure on that day from the FBI? Christopher Wray didn't inspire a ton of confidence yesterday.
Yeah, listen, Chris Wray's job is just to solve the crime. Of course, the suspect's already dead, so it's going to be an easy job for him. He'll do the basics. But the real question is, how did this agency, which was the premier security agency in the world, I mean, other countries model their presidential protection details against the skill sets of the Secret Service. How did it fall so far from its core mission? And I think some of it is leadership, some of it is a lack of focus, some of it is not deploying the resources to the core mission, but accepting other responsibilities and other jobs, or volunteering for other responsibilities and jobs that are not its core capability, stretching the service. And these warning signs began in 2014 and 2015 when then House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz did a remarkable investigation and warned about all the things that we're now seeing as symptoms of a Secret Service in distress. They didn't resource events properly. They were stretched too thin. They had a morale problem. They were focused on issues other than presidential security. They didn't coordinate well with local law enforcement. All of those things, which were flagged in an official congressional report that made 10 or 12 important recommendations, are at the heart of the failures we're beginning to understand occurred in Butler on July 13th. One of the most amazing things, I talked to one of the chief investigators for that investigation a decade ago, Tristan Levitt, who told us recently not a single one of the recommendations Congress made to fix those things were really ever implemented by the Secret Service. It simply kept on its path of drifting away from its core competency, and I think that's why Donald Trump's life was so recklessly put in danger on July 13th. We're going to learn a lot more. I don't think we know everything yet. I think there's more significant revelations coming in the next few days about what failed. Now, I'm going to mention one other thing. Last year, we obtained security footage of the morning of January 6th when Kamala Harris and the vice president-elect is whisked over to the Democratic National Committee. And what you can see in that video is that the Secret Service brought her within 10 yards of an active bomb, those bombs that were planted at the DNC and RNC, because they hadn't swept the property before bringing their protective subject into that property. One of the most extraordinary jaw-dropping lapses that we had seen before July 13th, nothing happened. No, there was no consequence.
Right.
The Secret Service didn't. I think that's a problem. There's a lack of accountability, so they've kept on this downward drift.
Well, that's a good point. We were just talking about this sort of this Orwellian treatment you get from these agencies that when Wray took over for Comey, we got here's 5 or 7 or 10 reforms I'm going to institute. Did he ever institute them? What was the impact? No one knows. No one even asks. Just these agencies are imperious because the threat of, we control the purse strings isn't much of a threat when you're never willing to pull the purse strings. And this is what we see happening over and over again.
Yeah, that's really a great point. I mean, Congress does these investigations, but the pain, the consequence, the accountability never really gets meted out. It always gets lost in the power of the purse string or the power of forcibly removing someone from their job because they're not performing well. Congress just hasn't had the courage to do it. They couldn't vote to defund Mayorkas' salary. They couldn't do obviously they sent some impeachment articles, but that was a safe vote because the Senate was never going to do it. So they've just not, the Republicans, when they're in control, or Democrats, when they're in control as well, simply have allowed this culture of malaise and declining excellence to fester at every single agency. You go through the last year what we've learned about agencies, from the FDIC to the FBI, the Secret Service to the Homeland Security Department. There is a culture of mediocrity and failure and almost no consequence for it.
Yeah. One thing I just want to get your take on before we let you go is the radio transmissions on January 13th, the day of the failed assassination attempt. I mean, there's no press on for those. I don't understand why, because if you get the radio chatter among Secret Service and you start to understand what people saw, when they saw it, the decisions they made in response to it, then you start to get more clarity about what happened on that day. And nobody's volunteering that they have them, that they're going to get transcripts of them, that it's going to be made public. Do you have any insight on that?
So that was where James Comer was headed. I think there are two very important pieces of evidence that I think will give us enormous clarity as to how these failures began. The first is the security planning documents. They canvassed the site on July 8th, 5 days before. What was the assessment of the site? Where the building that was used as a shooter's nest? Was it identified as a threat, or was it considered not a big problem? Those are big issues. Then the radio transmissions. Both of those things, James Comer, the Oversight Committee chairman, was in the process of getting, but now Mike Johnson has switched gears a little bit. He's moved to a non-partisan or bipartisan task force, both Democrats and Republicans. That's going to restart some of the investigation. That committee is going to have to redo the work James Comer's already done and then make those requests. That's going to slow down the process a little bit, but you are absolutely right. The radio transmissions and the original security plans were there, and I think a third element, because we're hearing it exists, are requests for additional resources that occurred after the security plan was laid, but before the morning of the 13th. Those may have been turned down. That would be a third body of evidence. We're going to get it, but it's going to take longer because this new committee that was approved last night unanimously by the House, it's got to get started. It's going to take some time for that to get started. Congress tends to be slow on these things.
Indeed. John Solomon, award-winning investigative journalist, founder of Just the News, justthenews.com. John, thank you as always.
Yeah, great to be with you guys.
Thank you so much. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
For over 10 years, the award-winning KWCC Construction